You are listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, Orange County's business talk show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.
And welcome to this edition of Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. I am your host, Richard Franzi, and this is podcast episode number 1070. Kirschner Creative specializes in boutique booking, management, and representation of established and emerging talent through a variety of creative and popular music genres. Their catalog represents musical artists and entertainment and acts that are artistically world-class and culturally relevant. They also specialize in the development and representation of new talent, and I've asked my friend Owen Kirchner to come and talk a little bit about their business. Owen, welcome to Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
Let's get started. It's my pleasure. Let's get started by maybe having you talk to our audience about an interesting story from your background, or sort of give us some context of you as an entrepreneur.
Well, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My father had started a business of petrochemicals. I was the kid who would go to work with my dad early, in 5-year-old kid tagging along, and he was selling paint to hardware stores at that time. And I remember vividly when he would get blown off as a salesman to as a rep,
right.
Somebody would say, just give me your card and we might call you for white paint. And he'd say, okay, I'll give you my card. It'll cost you a nickel. In the 60s, 70s. And that would often get the conversation, lengthened to a nickel.
Right.
Why would I give you a nickel for your business card? It didn't cost you that. And he would reply, because if I get a nickel from you, you're invested in me. You're not going to get rid of that card. You're going to remember me for a long time.
Right.
And many times he would get that sale. They would become very good friends. He was kind of a character in that way.
Sure.
When he passed, everybody got $1 million bill. Because they always remembered him, they were all invested in him personally. In my background, understanding that I'm in the music business, I sell art, and art is subjective to the people who are listening and or looking. I started as a musician at Disneyland.
Okay.
And Disney special events would send you out on another event under their umbrella, and somebody would say, "You play the trumpet very well. Do you know somebody that plays the piano?" And quickly, I realized that the opportunity for it to be a trumpet and piano event would be fine. But what I'm selling is my knowledge base, my roster of people that I trust. And if they trust me, they're going to trust my roster.
That's
so
awesome.
that turned into 12 years for Disney, and working with Disney special events and other event companies that evolved out of Disney. And I had heralding trumpets. That was my specialty when I was first at the theme park.
Okay.
And I started a group of heralding trumpets outside of the theme park to do special events. And that turned into an opportunity to work and conduct and arrange music with John Williams and conduct the opening and closing of the Olympics in 1984.
Wow.
Become part of that special events team that was resurrected 3 years later for the relighting of the Statue of Liberty in New York. Some of those folks have gone on with their own production companies to do multiple Super Bowls, pre-games. They've done things with Radio City Music Hall productions in New York and all over the world.
Didn't you say that you did audio or support for the Pope?
What
is that?
I had musicians for the Pope.
You had musicians for the Pope.
Yeah, the Pope did a mass at the L.A. Coliseum.
Sure.
I had been working at the Coliseum with USFL.
Right.
I saw them coming to town. It's a 90,000 seat venue. I'd already done the Olympics in that 90,000 seat venue, so why not do a football game?
Sure.
My corporation is Major League Music, and I've always liked seen the fact that musicians and athletes have to be both prepared and lucky in their timing.
Right.
And sometimes you can create the timing and look for opportunities.
So let's talk about the niches that you serve with your business. And we're going to focus on Kirschner Creative Artists
Certainly.
for this interview. So can you explain to our audience where you have found the most business or the right niche for your talent, skills, and team?
Well, I started with a lot of sports events. I worked for the Dodgers, Angels, Padres, again, the Olympics, USFL, and things like that. I found that a lot of the folks that own these teams also are philanthropic, and I really like the fact that my music is going to have its own legacy. But if you can bring music and elevate an event, charitable event especially, and maybe find a cure for a disease that they're supporting,
Right.
because disease doesn't discriminate, then my legacy is even greater.
Okay.
Other niches, well, I've always been doing special events, large, small, intimate, and grand. Went with a chamber orchestra for the royal wedding and then the Diamond Jubilee of the Queen in London. Have had a really nice run as a musician.
Right.
And so the niches...
Does that complement your creative, the business that you have? That
It
you're
does,
still-
because some of the musicians that I'm working with are like the Musique sur la Mer Orchestra, are under my catalog of kcartist.com or Kirschner Creative. And we have contracted with 4 of the greatest American composers that are living today, and helping bring awareness to waters around the world, saving our oceans. And the music is
the need for clean water.
The need for clean water, and how impactful the oceans are with the environment itself.
Yes, right.
And subsequently, so I represent the Musique sur la Mer Orchestra with this special love of our oceans and waterways performance.
Right.
I also have kind of a nostalgic thing where I have 3 groups that are they're interesting. One is called the La La Band Tour. The motion picture, you already have an idea of what that type of music is. It's
Right.
kind of like Michael Bublé light. Okay, so it may not be the $200,000 or $500,000 act of Michael Bublé, but it's going to be an enjoyable evening at a regional theater, whether it's Carpenter Center in Long Beach, maybe the cabaret section over at Segerstrom Hall or at Soka University. There are theaters like this around the country that fill their catalog and are looking for an enjoyable couple of hours for their guests.
Right.
I have a group I just signed called the San Andreas Sisters.
Oh boy.
They're like the Andrews Sisters, but more contemporary and lovely, and
That's awesome.
they're in full color. They're not in black and white as the Andrews Sisters were. I recently re-hooked up with a friend of mine up in Seattle who has Whipped Cream and Other Delights, which is a play on the Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass very special album of about 1967, when Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass were outselling the Beatles.
Wow.
And there's an audience for that. And so,
That's interesting.
people want to be better off 2 hours after they've heard music than when they came into the audience.
We're talking with Owen Kirchner. He's a friend of mine that I've known for some time, and talking about, I was going to ask you, Owen, what makes your firm, Kirschner Creative Artists, kind of unique? But I think you've already sort of brought that to the forefront in how you've described how you've blended your personal passion with a kind of a business and sort of in the niches that you are servicing. Is there anything else that's unique about your firm that we haven't talked about that differentiates you?
Well, we give back to charities.
Okay.
I was a caregiver for my mother with Alzheimer's, and I got on the board of Acacia Adult Day Center right here in Garden Grove, which we've recently merged with Alzheimer's of Orange County.
Sure. Good organizations.
Again, disease doesn't discriminate,
No.
and that's going to be more of my legacy. Always looking for something in that respect. I did have one corporate client who came up to me in a very loud way and said, "You're the one. You're the guy." And I thought, "Oh my God, what did I do?"
Am I in trouble here?
At the end of the event, and the compliment that they gave me was, "You're the guy. You're the only one of all my vendors who did what they said they were going to do, did not have the drama, came in, did a lovely job, in fact, made me look good." And that's my job, is to make the presenter look good.
Right. That's awesome. All right, we're going to take a short commercial break here on Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. When we come back, I'm fascinated how technology can be a disruptive force. And so in your space, in the business of talent management and representation, after the break, Owen, can you share with us a little bit about what technology has done and how you've responded to it?
Of course.
Okay, so don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen out there listening to us either live on octalkradio.net, maybe watching us on octalkradio.net's Facebook page as well, and maybe you're listening to us as a podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio or on YouTube in the video. Anyway, wherever you are, don't go anywhere, because we're going to be back with Owen in about 30 seconds after this word from me.
Richard Franzi is the author of 2 popular business books for CEOs. His first book, Critical Mass, The 10 Explosive Powers of CEO Peer Groups, was the first book ever written on the secret value of CEO peer groups. His second book, now with newly updated information, is Critical Mass, The Power of CEO Guiding Principles. Richard's books contain powerful information to help CEOs running middle market companies gain valuable insight to improve their decision-making skills. Richard's books are available as paperbacks or Kindle versions from Amazon.com. To find them, type Richard Franzi in the search box.
And welcome back to this edition of Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. I am your host, Richard Franzi. All of our shows can be heard anytime on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spreaker.com. Several hundred former guests whose CEOs have been on our show, and they put the podcast on their website somewhere. You know, since 2009, when we first started doing this podcast radio show, we've reached hundreds of thousands of listeners through the live stream here on octalkradio.net, the podcast, and the other channels that we use. Simply type in Critical Mass Radio Show into your favorite podcasting software, and you'll find our weekly shows with great guests like Owen Kirchner. Oh, and so before the break, I said I want to ask you to tell us about how technology has disrupted or at least impacted your industry. How has that happened?
Well, there's a word called YouTube. There's a word called Facebook.
Yeah,
And
right.
I think we're on Facebook Live today.
Yes.
You know, so hello to everybody there. Everybody wants immediate gratification. Now, when I first started, you would resource a catalog, you'd get an inquiry, you'd put together a package, you'd mail it out. Somebody would either get it 10 days later, put that video cassette in. Now they want to see an indication of what they're going to get or what they're going to consider to get, and then compare it to another 10 of them or 100 of them from their research on a Google search, or and get inspired as to what you do better than they do.
So has technology allowed you to better represent your artists because you have more platform to be able to connect the venues to, or
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I use a format called Vimeo.
right?
Vimeo, I think, has a higher bandwidth, a nicer presentation
Okay.
than YouTube.
Right.
Nothing wrong with YouTube. It's a very strong source.
Right.
But I don't want to be a Pinterest. Each
Okay.
event is separate. Each client has different needs and expectations. And so we customize every presentation and every event slightly different. And so not everything I have is published.
Okay.
You can go to the website at kcartist.com or the other website, music4events.com, with the number 4 in the title,
Uh-huh.
and get inspired, but it's not everything we have.
Right. So are you finding that your artists are more focused on their social media channels as well? Is that an important part of their brand?
It has to be.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody, a lot of the folks, I just signed a record label of progressive acoustic guitarists called Fret Monkey, and they have Fret Monkey Nation.
Wow.
They have 1 million listeners a month
Wow.
of these progressive guitarists.
Right.
One guy has 70 million YouTube views, which I, crassly said that's like guitar porn. Somebody's watching 70 million views of this one guy playing amazing guitar.
What is progressive? I mean, I don't
Progressive, it's an acoustic guitar that is kind of pushed to the limits, where they'll use all of the guitar with overtones and also using the frame of the instrument as a beatbox.
Okay.
And it sounds like 4 people playing at once at times.
I think I'm gonna have to listen to that. I like that. When an artist does that, I didn't know what I was listening to, but I enjoyed that.
It's a style of guitar known as finger style.
Okay.
And Fret Monkey, who I represent, has a number of these folks that are world champion.
My God.
Who knew there was even a competition?
Right.
World champion musicians.
Whenever I go to a local event and I see artists perform, I marvel at how many truly talented and gifted people there are in the world.
I don't think there's ever been more.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
And part of that, I think, is being inspired to learn the instrument, and they may not have to interact. Being a musician is an individual sport.
Yes. Right.
But it's played as a team sport in most cases.
Okay.
You have to be the best trumpet player.
Right.
But nobody wants the best trumpet player unless he's playing with a piano player or a band or something like that.
Right.
To really integrate what the sound can be.
Right. So we're this is an interesting conversation. So technology has both sort of made it a little bit harder, maybe, to differentiate your acts from others.
Certainly.
But also given your acts the opportunity to reach an audience through these platforms that 10 years, 20 years ago, I don't know how you would have gotten 1 million people interested in that specific niche of music. Right?
I was just talking to a musician about an hour ago, and I before coming in here, and I told you this, but one of the things he's frustrated with is that he's not internationally known. And I remember 20 years ago reading about a harpist in Inc. magazine in the Midwest and the title was Internationally Famous Locally. And there's nothing wrong with being everybody's favorite
Right.
in a big pool.
You know, you talk about
or a small pool.
specific artists. A couple years ago, we went to see a cover band of Pink Floyd who did The Dark Side of the Moon, because I think it was one of the anniversaries of the release of the album. And as an opening act, they had I think she was a foreign-born harpist who played Pink Floyd music on her harp. Like, I wouldn't even think that was a thing, right?
Sure.
But I was spellbound listening to her play that music. It was unbelievable. But, you know, it was just something that I had never experienced before.
Well, I've also run 3 summer concert series benefiting the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach.
Oh, yeah, I love that place.
And I had a woman who showed up to every concert. We had 9 concerts in the series. And at the end of this year, she came up to me, gave me a hug, and gave me what I thought was one of the best compliments I could get, which was the music you chose to present this summer challenged me.
Wow.
She said, I knew I was in for something different every week. And some of those acts, by the way, I found them on their way up.
That's always good.
And one young lady is now a backup singer to Gwen Stefani and having her own career. And I saw that she had a lot of upside. Another band is an opening act for Taylor Swift, and they're on the road 200-300 days a year.
Wow.
And I found them using my judgment, I thought it's a Wednesday night benefiting educational programs and animal care at the aquarium. You're not working on a Wednesday night, come and play at the aquarium.
Right.
You can videotape it. You can use it for your platforms, and that's good. Going back to the downside of the platforms, the electronic platforms, is you find somebody who becomes popular for being popular.
Right. We were just talking about that last night.
And it doesn't mean, they're more sizzle than steak.
Right.
You've heard that term before.
Yes.
There's no substance there. They develop substance once they get some management and direction. But
if they have the talent.
If they have the talent inherently. But some of these folks are really talented at making videos.
Mm-hmm.
And they just happen to sing, and they're nice looking or odd looking or whatever it might be.
Right.
Memorable in some way.
Right.
So they've there are people that are successful in spite of themselves, is what I think.
Okay, so we're actually coming up against the end of our time together.
Certainly.
So you already mentioned them, but for our audience that might want to learn more about your management company, what are the 2 websites you would direct them to, Owen?
Well, for your corporate events, your social, your charitable, music4events.com with the number 4 in the middle. For the theatrical acts and some things that I think are culturally interesting, that would be kcartists.com. K is in Kirschner, C is in creative. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, and there's a lot to watch. If you click on the Fret Monkey page on there, you can probably watch 40 different styles of guitarists.
Yeah, I think I will, frankly, just because I've taken something memorable away from our conversation. So thanks for being a friend of the program. Welcome to the Critical Mass community,
Thank
Owen
you.
Kirchner.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome to have you on the show. Been looking forward to it since we met each other and developed a friendship. So I'd also like to thank our engineer for today, none other than Mr. Paul Roberts.
Yeah.
Hey, our producers are Joan Park, Crystal Nunley, and Haley Stern. If you'd like to connect with me on social media, maybe a good place to start would be Twitter, and my handle is CEO Peer Groups. If you'd like to look me up on LinkedIn, I'm Richard Franzi, Franzi, and my website simply is criticalmass4, spelled out F-O-R, criticalmass4business.com. Until our next show, I hope all of your business decisions will move your company in a positive direction.
You have been listening to Critical Mass Radio Show Business Talk Show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.